Threatened to take my cats, lose 80,000 pounds. Hi, I'm OP. I initially posted this to r/pro revenge, but post was removed due to it not being revenge. I got suggested to post it here. I'd like to share my story. I had to shorten the story a significant amount. I hope it still makes sense. The numbers at the bottom are not the exact amount, but ballpark and relative. How it started: early in my teens, I tumbled into a deep depression and struggled for a long time. Around 8 years ago, after I broke through my depression thanks to therapy and medication, I also figured out I am transgender. Fast forward half a year, I met my now ex. Let's call them X. Within the first week of dating, I poured everything out. I told X I wasn't ready to socially transition at all. Mind you, I only recently got a decent paying job, still lived with my parents, etc. X seemed very supportive and assured me they have no problem whatsoever with me being who I am. And so 4 years passed when we finally decided to buy a house together. X's parents, however, were loaded, and they made a nice donation to X by splitting up their savings between siblings when we told them about our plans. At this point, we also discussed that if things were to go sideways, we'd just friendly part ways and split everything back to each other's original investment. We made some offers and ended up buying a nice place in between our two places of work. Since I had a car, commuting for me was easy, but for X, it was more difficult. They had to take public transport every day for 1 hour there and 1 back. Out of the frying pan into the fire. We adopted 2 cats as we were both animal people, and COVID just hit, so I wouldn't feel so lonely when working from home while X was out working on site. However, the high I was riding of finally being independent and being able to live my own life was short-lived. See, my job requires me to be on call for several days of the month, usually 7/14 if a colleague is ill. My phone would ring in the middle of the night, waking us both up. We never really argued before, but I recall this as the breaking moment. X started acting in a way that I'd already seen before, my parental home. In situations like this, I learned that agreeing is usually the quickest way to end confrontation, and so I slept on the couch, not even a month after moving into my own house. Things escalated from there. After a few more months, I was doing all the work around the home. I was the only one caring for the cats. If I didn't do it, nobody would. Besides that, I wasn't free to be who I wanted. I received mean comments when I did something gender-affirming, for example, a new haircut. Note that at this point, I was not ready to come out yet. I created an entire plan and timeline for myself. Come 2022, during the course of 2022, X did their best to keep me down, but I wouldn't let them. At some point, X decided it would be easier to give up. We had a talk where we agreed we'd mutually break up and divide everything fairly. I had every intention to keep the house as my cats got used to it. I made some friends in the area and my work was relatively close. As X had no intention to keep the house, commuting to work while their parents lived in the town they worked in, we went on from the assumption that I would keep the house. One evening, somewhere in November last year, we had an argument over the money that I'd have to pay them. It started small, as X had listed a broken vacuum cleaner on the list of items, and I started asking questions if we could scrap it. The argument evolved, and X threatened to take my cats from me as part of the deal. This was the hill I was willing to die on. Never threatened to take away my cats. I stopped arguing and started calling a friend, as I needed some support. X knocked my phone out of my hands, picked up their phone, called their parents and put them on speakerphone. The words X spoke will haunt me forever. OP is trans and wants to be us insert gender. My first instinct I won't share, but you can imagine. After calling a helpline, I calmed down and I gathered my courage and called up everybody I could think of and told them. I wasn't going to let X win this one. An hour after X's initial phone call, their dad showed up and started threatening lawyers and spouting things like that I was mentally ill, I would never be a /insert gender, and that they would do whatever it cost to get the house from me or leave me with as little as possible. Revenge malicious compliance time. Fast forward a week or so, X sent over a new version of the proposed financial resolution. The amount that I had to pay, X was increased by a significant amount. I wanted this to be over quickly, so I just agreed, as long as X would cover the costs of the notary, as their amount was the maximum I could borrow from the bank. They did not know this. X did not agree and hiked their price again, stating that if I don't agree, the price will just continue to go up. X made an entire Excel spreadsheet detailing their investment as well as mine. What I noticed was that in the Excel, everything was tied together. If X hiked their price, the price to buy me out was getting hiked as well. And that's when I realized I had them by the balls. See, they were blindsided and thought I would do anything to not move to my parents. I argued back and forth and played dumb at one point, just to drive up the price. The email stated that X forgot to calculate how much more the house was worth now than 2 years ago, and hiked the price by 20%. As per usual, X copy-pasted their calculations and said, "This is the price you pay me," or "This is the price I pay you." And that's when I took my chance. I agreed to let X buy me out for the amount specified, and in my reply also stated that all previous negotiations of who pays the notary would also be valid, the buyer. I ended my email with, "I don't have to remind you that an agreement over email is just as valid as a contract." I pushed them to contact a notary within a reasonable time, or I would seek legal counsel to force them to pay my share. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I receive a call from the notary that they are working on the deed and need my details. Approximately a month later, it would be ready to sign. I double-checked the numbers. It was all there. And shortly after, it was signed. The reason I'm posting this now instead of at the end of 2022 is because, like I said, X didn't want to keep the house. It went up for sale immediately, approx £40,000 above market value. I had the house favorited and checked periodically. Every so often, it would drop in price and receive the new sticker on the website. It dropped approx 60,000 euros before yesterday in total, when it was finally sold. I calculated the damages based on their handy Excel sheet, and if we assume the initial fair split, like we agreed 3 to 4 years ago. My ex lost about £40,000 of their own investment, not only in buying me out, but notary costs, taxes, etc. If we assume the split I initially agreed on to get it over with, my ex lost out on £80,000. I am now living my life to the fullest, with friends and an amazing partner who is truly supportive. Lesson learned, however. I bought a new place for myself, funded by X. I will never share ownership of ever again. Never threaten to take away my cats. The cats are with me and doing great. Too long didn't read. X outs me to their loaded parents and is blindsided by greed, threatens to take my cats, and is too overconfident in thinking I would not sell them my share of the house. Increasing the price on both sides of the equation, costing them up to $80,000 when I agree.
Well done. I am confused about X outing you, though. Since their parents weren't okay with you being trans, didn't that taint X in their view because that meant X was somehow not normal? I don't understand how people can give a crap about what other consenting adults do with their parts. So maybe I'm missing something obvious here.
I've wondered a lot about this. My assumption is that when I initially came out to them, I was still just my old self. And for the next 4 years, nothing much changed. In hindsight, there were some signs which I stupidly ignored, such as going shopping. If I'd pick clothing from the preferred gender, they'd get all fidgety. I think X was ashamed to be seen with me, and so as long as I didn't socially transition, it was fine. Perhaps they hoped it was just a phase.
If X was not comfortable with the idea of you transitioning, why buy a house with you? That seems like terrible planning or terrible self-awareness by X. I'm so glad you put X behind you and are walking the path you want to walk. Good on ya, OP.
Honestly, this has been a huge discussion point under friends. We boiled it down to sunken cost fallacy. They were already in their longest relationship yet and were afraid to be stranded alone. Exactly what ended up happening after people learned what they did.
Just going to slip in a note here. OP has also added pictures of their cats in the post, if you want to check those out. Also, would it be technically fraud for OP to have bought the house after getting money from the family? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, moving on to the next story.
What are you going to do about it? Call the cops. I was explaining to my mom what malicious compliance was, and she reminded me of this story. I was a senior in high school when all of a sudden I got sick at school and had to be sent home. Because my car was in the shop, Mom had to come get me. It's about 9:30 a.m. when this happened. As we're driving up a very busy street, we see two 7-8-year-old kids, we'll call them Frank and Zelda, trying to cross. Worried, Mom pulls over to see what's going on. The conversation went roughly as follows. "Kids, are you guys okay? What are you two doing here?" "Dr. Idiot said we couldn't come to school early, so he sent us home." Now Mom is very familiar with Dr. Idiot. He was the principal at the elementary school my younger brother was attending at the time. My brother Mark was going through some behavioral issues at the time, and Mom was commonly called to the office, to the point they were on a first-name basis. Not that he allowed her to use his first name, because I have a doctorate in education. So it's Dr. Idiot. So in other words, he was an entitled idiot. There was a gas station 10 feet away, so Mom tells Frank and Zelda to meet us there. We pulled in, got some water for the kids as it was a hot day, and Mom calls Dr. Idiot's cell phone. Again, the conversation went roughly as follows. "This is Dr. Idiot. Hi, this is Mark's mom. I have two kids here named Frank and Zelda, and they say they were sent home early?" "Yes. Their parents dropped them off at 6 a.m. because they had to work. Something about mandatory overtime. Of course, we're not a daycare, so I just told the kids to go home and wait for the bus." "Are you kidding me? We're 5 miles away from the school. They walked all that way. It's a wonder they weren't hit by a car or kidnapped. What are you going to do about it? Call the cops?" Mom was absolutely floored, but she decided to give Dr. Idiot a nice dose of reality. At the time, we lived in a small town. How small? So small that sometimes the chief of police would have to walk the beat. And that day, he happened to be a block or so away from the gas station. When he got the call, he arrived, got the whole story from not only Frank and Zelda, but from Mom and me. And being a father of 2 elementary-age kids himself, he was peed. He looked at Mom and said, "Chief of, it's time I had some words with Dr. Idiot." The chief of police drove Frank and Zelda to the school in the squad car, which they were super excited about, personally escorted them to their class, and then marched to Dr. Idiot's office and proceeded to tear him a new butthole. Telling Dr. Idiot that he'd helped the parents press charges on him for child endangerment, among other things. From that day on, Dr. Idiot allowed Frank and Zelda to be at the school early on the days their parents had mandatory overtime. So I got some details from Mom about why Frank and Zelda were just dropped off at school. Their aunt works at the elementary school and had agreed to watch them until school started a couple of hours later. She wasn't on the clock. Frank and Zelda didn't live in a good part of town, and their parents, understandably, didn't feel their kids would be safe if they were alone. If Dr. Idiot had driven them home to wait for the bus, it wouldn't have gotten on the chief of police's nerves.
Hi everyone, hope you all enjoyed this story. Once again, I'm always open to criticism. Anything you guys can tell me will help. Let me know what you guys thought of the story in the comments, and share any stories you guys might have as well. The link to the original post, as always, will be in the description, and make sure to follow for new videos every day.